Hi, I'm Aidan from the Gwinnett County Public Library. Welcome to this fourth installment in our Codemaking and Codebreaking series. In this set of videos, we're exploring the fascinating world of codes and ciphers. Today we're going to be talking about how the rise of new communications technologies in the 19th and 20th centuries offered new, exciting opportunities for communication. But we're also going to talk about the challenges that those communications technology posed. We're going to be looking at two special codes that were created in this era. Morse Code, which was invented in the 19th century, and a very special code used by the Navajo Code Talkers during World War II. To learn about Morse Code, we first need to explain the technology that inspired it. The electrical telegraph system was in many ways the first major technological advance of our modern communications era. It was invented in the 1830s, and it used pulses of electromagnetism sent down wires to communicate over vast distances. Somebody at one station would begin to tap out a message, and this would be relayed down the wire to another telegraph operator. This would enable you to send a message from coast to coast remarkably quickly and with great accuracy. The earliest telegraph systems were incredibly complicated. In 1837, an American inventor by the name of Samuel Morse came up with his own simpler and more cost-effective version of the electrical telegraph system. Instead of using multiple wires and multiple needles, he used just one. That meant that his needle could only go to one of two different positions. It could either go to the left or to the right, producing a dot or a dash on a piece of ticker tape. Now, Morse thought when he created his invention that the people operating his system would be looking at that ticker tape and using it as a written record of the communication. What happened in practice, though, was completely unexpected. His system created two distinct sounds when the needle went to the left or to the right, and what that meant was that the operator didn't even need to look at the dials. They could just listen to the sounds, and they could tell whether a dot or a dash was being produced. Along with his technical invention, Morse also created what became the basis of Morse code. Now, this differs from the other codes we've talked about in an important respect. Those are trying to disguise your meaning. In this case, Morse was trying to make it possible to communicate faster and more succinctly. It used different patterns of dots and dashes to represent letters of the alphabet, as you can see here. So now it's time for you to give it a go. I want you first, though, to hear the differences between the dot sound and the dash. So this is our short sound, the dot, and it sounds like this. And this is our longer sound, the dash, and it sounds like this. Let's just play those for you one more time. This is the dot, and this is the dash. Now, I want you to remember that these messages would come in very quickly, and that the transcriber would need to work fast. So rather than trying to decode the message as you go, the best thing to do is keep a record of the entire message. Then when you're done, pause and try and work out what it means. Are you ready to give it a go? Let's start. Your transcribed note should look like this. If you got that, then well done. You do have good listening skills. Now, one of the coolest things about Morse code is that it outlasted the technology it was designed to work with. It was used right up until the end of the 20th century, long after the telegraph system had gone into obsolescence. Our second type of code, code talking, was developed in wartime. Toward the end of the 19th century, there were two major new communication technologies invented, the telephone and the radio. Now, these made it possible to communicate instantly with someone using your voice, which was brilliant in terms of being able to relay information accurately and quickly. This advent of new technology presented a problem for military application, because while it enabled you to send information very quickly, which was incredibly useful in warfare, it also meant that there was a risk of interception. With the telephone, you could tap a wire, and with the radio, you could just listen into the broadcast. What that meant was that they would need to invent some way of communicating information secretly. At several key points during World War I, the American military used a system of code talking. Native American soldiers would translate a message directly into their own language and then relay it through telephone or through radio to another person who also spoke that same language, who could decode it. Now, this was pretty effective, but after World War I, the German and Japanese military sent students to America to learn those languages, meaning that by the time World War II occurred, it was much less secure. And it could no longer trust that messages delivered in Choctaw or Cherokee could be safe, that they wouldn't be decoded. They started to look to other languages to see if they could figure out another way of using the same idea. Enter Philip Johnston. Now, Philip Johnston had actually grown up on a Navajo reservation. At the age of 9, he'd even served as an informal translator for President Theodore Roosevelt during negotiations with the tribe. He had the idea that the Navajo language, which had never been written down, would be an ideal candidate for wartime transmission. Johnston presented this idea to the United States Marine Corps, and they gave the go-ahead for what is called a pilot program. Now, a pilot program is a small-scale test of a system that you think could be used on a much larger scale. It allows you to work out some of the problems and to make sure that it really is worth the investment. A team of 29 soldiers developed a series of code words because they recognized that simply translating a word into Navajo didn't offer enough security, because if their enemies could get someone who could speak the language, they could then work out what was meant. Navajo words were chosen to represent various implements of war. For example, different types of plane would be represented with different Navajo words for types of bird. A patrol plane would be a crow, a dive bomber, a chicken hawk, and so on. Now, what this meant was that even if a native Navajo speaker happened to overhear a message, they wouldn't be able to decipher its meaning, offering an additional layer of security. The pilot program was an enormous success. In a test, they were able to encode, transmit, and decode a message in less than 3 minutes, much, much faster than any other system the United States Marine Corps had. And as a result, it was used in almost all of the major operations in the Pacific sphere. To give you an example, during the Battle of Iwo Jima, 6 Navajo soldiers were responsible for encoding, sending, receiving, and transcribing 800 messages. And they managed to do this without a single error. Their efforts were regarded as being instrumental in winning that battle. During World War II, around 400 Navajo soldiers participated in the Code Talker program. 13 of them sadly died in action. The Navajo code language was never deciphered, and so it remained in use and classified through the Korean and Vietnam Wars until it was finally declassified in 1968. Over the decades that followed, their story and their contribution began to become widely known, and their efforts and those of other Native American code talkers were recognized in the granting of Congressional Gold Medals, one of our country's highest honors. Thank you for joining me for today's session of Codemaking and Codebreaking. I hope you join me next time for our final session when we talk about Digraph substitution ciphers. I hope to see you then.